Now, for the few of you who don't know me, I'm Michi Bradley with REC Networks. And I'm pretty sure that at one time or another, you used one of my sites for some reason. So, so that's what we've been involved with. And we're going to go ahead and put together, I went ahead and put together this presentation for the LPFM station checklist. This is something that every LPFM station and every full power station should be consulting every so often to make sure that you're in compliance. So, the objectives is to understand the items that are on the LPFM station self-inspection checklist, what you can do to ensure that your station remains compliant, and then we'll put in a couple shameless plugs at the end of other resources that you could use to make sure that that can help you stay compliant. I apologize if we can't, if everybody can't see this. And actually, I think I will sit down. So, yeah, and also, well, it's also I'm also thinking the chairs here. These chairs are pretty.
We can move on.
Yeah, no big deal. No big deal.
Sorry. Thank you.
This is the FCC version of the self-inspection checklist. Like anything else that the government puts out, it's dry, dull, and boring. And also, too, the government, in their infamous wisdom, has not updated this since 2008. You look in their checklist, there's still information in there about the 10-watt LPFM stations. That never happened, that were written out in 2012. So there's a few things in there that don't apply to anybody because they don't exist or they've been changed. So there is a REC version of the FM station checklist, LPFM station checklist, that takes every single point in this FCC document that's still valid, but just twists it around a little bit, puts them in different places, puts them in a more logical order because, unlike the FCC, we do think with logic. So we will continue. So
where do we find that? Is that on your website?
It's on my website. The URL will be at the end, but it's going to be recnet.com/checklist. And really, we've divided it up into 5 big topics: station records and inspection availability, your broadcast day, technical operations, emergency alert system, and antenna structures. So let's talk first about unattended operation. That's one of the big things that's mentioned in the checklist. If your station is operating unattended at any time, meaning there isn't somebody there who's very occasionally reading the meters, checking the transmitter, making sure everything stays in compliance, then there are specific rules that come into play here. You need to have some kind of an automatic or manual detection of an out of tolerance condition, and if it happens, if there is an out of tolerance condition, you are expected to shut down your station within 3 hours, unless you can fix the problem like right away. And if you can fix the problem, then fix the problem. But if you can't, you got to shut down within 3 hours. Any station that's going, and this is a good idea for every single LPFM station out there, is if you're going to run unattended at any time, meaning leaving the station overnight so everybody can sleep, notify the FCC, and there's an informal process where you just mail them a letter that has your name, address, and phone number of a responsible person. So that way, if something goes wrong, the FCC has on file who to call. Who's going to call at 2 o'clock in the morning when the transmitter is going at 1,000 watts and interfering with K-Love down the road? I mean, that's so that's really what that's for. But there's also inspections. your station, the rule basically states, and the checklist basically states that an LPFM station is, quote, subject to inspection by the FCC during business hours or any time the station is in operation, which kind of, that kind of contradicts itself, because it makes you think, okay, well, if you're on the air 24 hours a day, what if the FCC wants to inspect at 3 o'clock in the morning? They don't. But I don't like the way that's worded, but that's the wording that's in the checklist. Most LPFM stations do not have, and this is a huge myth in the LPFM. We talked about this at NFCB, but it's a huge myth in the LPFM world that an LPFM station is required to have a staffed main studio. It's also a myth, too, that LPFM stations are required to run 8 hours a day of local programming. That only comes into play if your application in the 2013 window was mutually exclusive with another application, and your application beat out some other application based on points. Not on settlement, not on moving, but if it got down to that final tiebreaker and it got down to the points, that's where the pledge points come in. I have a page on my site, recnet.com/pledges, that has a complete list of all the LPFM stations that are subject to the pledge. And again, I apologize to all the full power folks in here. We do have a lot of LPFM subjects, because there are a few things here that are unique to LPFM. We have some unique rules. We have. And this is that aspect is one of them. But the bottom line is that if the FCC requests access to your studio, to where your records are, or to your transmitter, you must accommodate them, and that applies to everybody, even the full powers. And yes, refusing an inspection can lead to forfeitures. What are you hiding? That's really, or we have situations where the person who's the FCC comes, the person who's on duty doesn't feel that they're authorized to allow the FCC in, and I think the FCC would be a little reasonable if they know that you're getting somebody who is authorized to come down there and take care of the situation. So. Rarely ever. And there are ways to avoid even the surprise visits, or at least avoid some of them. At your station, items that must be accessible to the FCC, I would say this would probably apply for everybody here. Your authorizations, so your license, your construction permit. A lot of stations, when I was at KHOI last year, they had it hung up on the wall and framed. You can do that. You're allowed to do that, and that's a good way to do it. Plus, also, that goes to show anybody who walks in the door, hey, we're licensed. We're not a pirate. Your station logs, which we'll probably talk about here in a little bit. The political file, which is a very ugly subject. Your EAS log, your antenna log if you have a facility that is subject to lighting or painting. And also in those cases, the logs must be maintained for they must be retained for at least 2 years. It's always good to keep them longer, but the minimum requirement is 2 years. Now, of course, with a full power, you've got public file to deal with. So you've got to make sure that your public file is available for inspection by the FCC. And I know that there's changes in the rules right now, and they're going online on some things and such for the full power world. So,
but you have that on your site.
Yeah, I don't have too much information on full power, but specifically on the public file. But that's pretty much where it's at there. Also, too, remember the letter I told you about to write to the FCC when you have unattended operation? Make sure a copy of that's in your station records, too. And that should stay in there as long as you stay in unattended operation, if it's more than 2 years. Also, the documents must be placed at a control point for your station. So just a designated place in your station where somebody can get that, usually near where the board is. Somewhere in that area is usually the best place for it. You know, wherever your primary place of operation is. All right, so this is the self-check. This is the actual items that are on the checklist. If you see the self-check up there, that's what it is. These are the things that the self-inspection list would be looking for, and these are the things that if you do get a visit, that they'll be looking for. Are your authorizations that we talked about, your license, your construction permit, is that at the control point? Do you have at least 2 years of logs, assuming you're more than 2 years old? Are the station records available for inspection? Are they, if the FCC was to walk in, can somebody say, oh, okay, they're over there in that cabinet, I'll get them out? You know, or is it going to be something where, oh, they're at the chief engineer's house down the road, and that's not exactly what we'd like to see. One of the things I talked about in the earlier session was about the logs documenting all maintenance issues, including the date and the time that of who did it. So, like if your transmitter goes down, or you shut down for some reason, or you know, maybe you want to shut down because somebody's going to work on the tower or something like that, note it in the log. Note it in the log anytime you shut down and anytime you come back up. Anytime that you detect an out of tolerance condition, you check your transmitter power output and you see that it's, you know, more than 105% of what's on your license. Note it, adjust it, and then note that it's been adjusted. Just it's all CYA. This is all CYA. Political file, which is like I said, is a really ugly discussion. I tell LPFM stations, just stay away from politics. But the bottom line is this: on the political file, even if you just totally refuse to do anything for anybody, if they still approach you and want want airtime, and you refuse them, you still have to put that in a political file that you refused them. So you're always going to have, you're not going to be able to walk out of that political file obligation there. If your station is running attended, does the station have someone or something monitoring the station operation, meaning that there's somebody there 24/7? That's why I'm saying that LPFM stations are more likely to have some form of unattended operation, where the big stations might have an engineer there 24/7. You know, although that's going away too with, you know. But if operating unattended, does the station have automated equipment and/or periodic human monitoring? And then finally, the last checkpoint on that one is if the station is running unattended, has the FCC been notified of a responsible party? And those are basically the questions on the checklist. And you know, you either answer yes or they are pending going back into compliance, and then you want to make sure. Now, one thing I got to point out about the checklist though is the checklist, whether you use my checklist or whether you use the FCC's, and I do have a checklist form that you can use. That's just a 2-page form that just goes down each of these items, and you can either mark yes or no. You do not have to give that to the FCC. You do not have to send that in. You never send them in a checklist. There's no need to. There's no need to. This is your own self-assurance that you're in compliance. Let's talk about broadcast day. Operating schedule, this actually applies for all stations, all NCE stations. Minimum 5 hours a day, 36 hours a week. You are allowed to not broadcast on the weekends. And if you're an actual school, like an elementary K through 12 kind of school, or even a college, I guess you could say, you can shut down the station completely for vacations, for summer vacation, for Christmas. You can completely shut down the station. And of course, NCE, non-commercial educational operation, is your station following all the rules regarding underwriting. No calls to action, no promotions, no plugola, no payola, no anything that would, nothing that would be allowed, but also too nothing that would be allowed specifically for non-commercial stations. You want to make sure that 100% of your programming is non-commercial, follows the rules. And just a quick plug, if anybody gets any questionable copy, if they want to run it by some ears, if they want to run it by some eyes, and I'll take a look at it. If you ever want to email me your proposed copy that you want to run on the air for something, for an underwriter, throw it by me, because I can usually pick and choose. I always have, when I listen to non-commercial stations, I always have an ear for that, and I'm constantly contacting LPFM and non-commercial stations, when I hear something. And I'll say, you realize that's got a call to action in it. You might not realize it, but it's got a call to action. And when you have a lot of people who are writing these things, if somebody's not overlooking them, it can get by and get on the air. And so that's just some of the stuff that you need to be careful. Now, something specific for LPFM is retransmission rules. And LPFM cannot rebroadcast the signal, even if it's for part of a day, of a full power FM station.
What about another LPFM?
Yes. You can broadcast, however, there's a massive caveat behind that, any kind of rebroadcasting, and that is around management and time brokerage agreements. So another LPFM station can't say, here, we're going to manage the operation of your station too, and we'll let we'll put the programming for both, we'll put the programming on both stations. What they don't want to see is and this is happening, it's happening today, they don't want to see multiple LPFM stations operated by a real party in interest. And we're fighting that right now. We got a big case in Houston right now that I'm fighting. There's a couple other cities that have an issue like that. And I'm going to get, okay.
I was just asking about the rebroadcasting full power radio stations. Does that count for syndicated content as well, like a one-off, 1 hour?
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't say so. As long as you're not directly taking it from the other station. As long as you're not directly taking it off the air. Basically the rule exists because they don't want LPFM stations to become translators.
Right.
That's the key reason for that being in there. That rule's been in there since day one, because the worry was that the Christian organizations and the other organizations were going to come in, take all the LPFM stations, and just use them as translators of other full power stations. The problem is they are doing it, but they're doing it off of their satellite networks. EWTN, 3ABN from the Seventh-day Adventist Church are two big, huge. We had over 100 LPFM licenses went out to Catholic Church organizations to do nothing but rebroadcast EWTN in this 2013 window. I mean, that's pretty sad when at least 10 to 15% of the applications filed in 2013 were mass filers and speculators. Not just Caesar Guel, but the Catholics, the SDAs, New Tang Dynasty, a Chinese organization, nailed about 20 LPFMs in major markets. And, I can't fight them all.
Do you have issues with timeshares?
No. The only issue that's really going on with the only timeshare fight that's really still going on is the one in Philadelphia. And I believe that has gone to the courts. I don't know where that's at right now. I haven't heard anything on that one. But let's get back onto the checklist. Station identification, are you running a station identification at or near the top of the hour? It's call sign and city. And in the case of LPFM, the LP at the end is a part of your call sign. Make sure you're saying it. I'm catching a lot of LPFMs that aren't. That's, it's WREC LP Riverton, Maryland. Not WREC Riverton, 1021 LPFM. You don't, that's not legal. Also telephone conversations. This applies to everybody. All parties must give consent to a conversation being broadcast live or for later rebroadcast. So you just can't bring up the phone line, you can't bring up the hybrid on the air, punch a dial tone, dial somebody's number out at random and put them right on the air. You can't do that. That's not legal. And there's been some, in the commercial world, there's been some pretty huge fines on that one. But however, for like a call-in show, consent is assumed, because obviously they're calling in to talk on the air, so the caller knows that they're going to be on the air. Go ahead.
Can I go back to station identification?
Yeah.
Could you be a little clearer about what is required?
Okay.
Just give me an example. That would help.
Okay, I didn't know if I had it in here or not. Okay. What can be allowed, in the case of LPFM, of course, it's a 4-letter call sign with the LP on the end. Then between that and your city of license, the one that is on your actual station license, in the middle there, you can put, there's a few things you're allowed to put in there. You're allowed to put in your frequency. It's in the rules, but no one ever uses it. Your FM channel number, the 201 through 300. Nobody ever uses that. Actually, some of the early FM radios, actually back in the 50s and such, they actually had the channel numbers instead of the frequencies. I think they were trying to push that at one time. And, or the name of the organization that runs the station.
Licensing.
Yeah, the licensee's name.
And we could use a short phrase.
No.
Not between the call letters and the city. You can use a short phrase after the city. And you can also use, you can also add more cities on there as long as the city of license is mentioned as the first one. I could say WREC, LP, Riverton, Mardellis Springs, Sharptown. As long as Riverton is if I go into FCCdata.org and I look at if I look up a station and I see that big name, that big city name that's up there right under the call sign on FCCdata.org, that's the city I should be giving out first.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem there.
Just one other thing. So
Sure.
Can you put the word like in between the call letters? And
I don't think there's an issue with that. I really don't think so. I really don't think that's an issue.
okay.
That's just say, well, if WKRP could do it, I guess so could we. So here we go. The self-check. These are the items that are on the FCC checklist. Is your station operating the minimum schedule? Are your station identifications being made in accordance to the rule? Is your station maintaining non-commercial status? I mean, these things also apply to your. These first three apply to full power also. Is 100% of the programming from sources other than a full power broadcast station? That's LPFM exclusive. And does the station notify telephone callers of their intent to broadcast the conversation before recording or airing the call? Of course, that applies to everybody.
Question right here.
Yeah.
100% of the programming, so even if it's time shifted, if it originates on a full power station, you cannot rebroadcast it at all. Is that correct?
I'm not going to say that. I think it's a simultaneous. I'd have to look up the actual rule, but I think it's simultaneous. And it's if you are sourcing from that station, if you're sourcing from that other station, this is something that's going to be very hard for the FCC to prove. Because what doesn't say that you're not getting it off a satellite feed, from a network, from a radio network, or that's the whole thing. That's the key thing. If it's coming from a network source, whether it's coming from Pacifica or whether it's coming from some other network source, then it just they're getting this. The other station, the full power stations, are getting the feed the same exact way you are. So there is that hierarchy. The restriction is if the hierarchy is the full power station, and the LPFM is feeding off of that. Now, going the other way, there's no rule against an LPFM station being carried on a full power. And actually, for quite a long time, I actually did a few shows for WTND LP in Macomb, Illinois. And my shows were also carried on WQNA, which is a full power NCE in Springfield, Illinois. So So yeah, you can go one way but not the other. All right, this is pretty much LPFM related, so, but it's technical operations. One of the things they're going to be looking for is power versus height. And the graphic depicts our station here.
Yay.
And it shows that even though KUHSLP is a 2-watt station, notice that the service contour of that station is just about right in that 5.6 kilometer, and that's the reason why LPFM stations have to reduce power as they increase, because they have to pretty much stay within that 5.6 kilometer service contour. LPFM stations are allowed a minimum of 50 watts at 30 meters or a 4.7 kilometer service contour. And if your station's within 125 kilometers of Mexico, you are stuck at that level. That's a totally different story altogether. And this graphic just basically shows you as your height above average terrain goes up, your effective radiated power goes down. Let's see here. Transmitter power output. We just had a little conversation outside about that with WXOX. Stations are authorized for their effective radiated power. The transmitter power output must be set based on your feed line type and length, insertion loss for any other equipment like a lightning arrestor, as well as the specs on your antenna, whether you have whether your antenna has a gain or a loss. That transmitter power output is calculated at the time that you file your license, the time you file your 319. Whoever's doing the engineering work is going to calculate all that information and then tell the FCC, okay, based on the calculations, based on the LMR 400 cable with and the one bay circular polarized antenna, my 100 watt station we calculated at 276 watts power out. Well, actually, we're using the example down there at the bottom, 280 to make out to 100 watts. And that's kind of a real world example right there. And that we have there.
And I like that you put in the connector loss too.
Yeah, connectors. I normally don't count connectors because they're just the connectors are minuscule, but you still have to take that into consideration. You still have to think about that. Yeah, anything that's hooked up there. So I mean, if you're sitting there taking 3 or 4 pieces of coax and doing barrel connectors to extend it out, you're going to get some loss there. So that's pretty much what we got there. So any changes that you make to your feed line or your antenna, so as long as the antenna height, and then this, I think. Yeah, this is just LPFM, because I think full power you have to file first for this. I know translators you do. As long as location and height stays the same, a change in your feed line and antenna can be done without a construction permit. Just go ahead and make the change, and then you just have to file a 319 modified license to let the FCC know about your new antenna type and what your new revised transmitter power output is. So you have to get your TPO recalculated.
Mika, I just went through that when we changed ours, and I talked to James Bradshaw in the audio division.
Bradshaw to you.
What's that?
Mr. Bradshaw to you.
Anyway, because I was confused whether I had to file the 318, both the engineer and I were in the 318 before we filed the 319, and he said, no, I think you can probably just get away with filing the 319. And I had previously left a message at the audio division, and so I filed it, and 2 days later I got a call back from somebody else in the audio division that said, well, our rules are kind of screwed up a little bit because it says this on one and this on the other, and really you should file the 318 before the 319, but since you already filed the 319, it said the only thing that was changing was your TPO. you're okay. But really,
Yeah, and see that is and what I have up here is specifically in the rules. It's in I think 73870. It's in the rules. So yeah, sometimes you do get wrong. This is why you can't always rely on the information you get over the phone from the Media Bureau. It's not in stone, and as we saw during the beginning of the window, even blog posts from the chief of the Media Bureau don't hold any water. Of course, I'm talking about the whole Philadelphia MX situation. LPFM stations are expected to operate at least 90%, but not exceeding 105% of their authorized transmitter power output shown on the station license. So you do have a little wiggle room in there. Don't exploit it too much. But the 105 tolerance is in there just because your mileage may vary, your power may vary. I'm thinking now with the better designed transmitters, I'm thinking that the power stays pretty stable these days.
Within 2%.
Yeah.
All the modern ones stay within 2.
Yeah, and if you're doing LPFM, you better be using a modern day transmitter. This is one of the issues that's really in this affects everybody really, but it's in the rules and it's in the checklist for LPFM, and really all of your modern transmitters, unless there's something really wrong with it, will deal with the issue with some of these issues already, but the power measurement, they want you. This gets a little complex, but either check your power either through using a watt meter. I think, and even the transmitters these days. I don't know how reliable are the watt meters that are installed on the transmitters these days. Are they?
If you bought it recently, they're usually pretty close.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can always just stick a bird on there or something just to play it safe.
What I do is I put a bird in it, and whichever one gives me more optimistic results, I'll use that as a reference.
Yeah. So, and then there's this really strange formula to go through, which I'm not going to get into at all, regarding if you want to measure your transmitter power by indirect method. I'm not even going to go there. Carrier frequency of your transmitter may not drift off more than 3 kilohertz each way. Your modulation must be kept between 85 and 100%. So that way you don't have people turning up their radio to 10 to try to hear you. And attenuation at more than 120 kilohertz from the carrier must be performed. There's certain out of band carrier attenuation that you've got to deal with. If your transmitter is spurring off somewhere else, yeah, there's going to be problems. But most of your modern stuff is pretty well put together. In order to detect that anyway, you're going to need a spectrum analyzer to deal with that. LPFM, big issue. Certified transmitters. And especially with our friends at SCMS being in the news just recently, and unfortunately they've been vindicated on the whole BW TX300 issue. But any of the transmitters that are used on LPFM stations must be specifically FCC type certified for LPFM. There's not a lot of them out there. But if a non-com gives you a transmitter and says, okay, you can use our old 300 watt transmitter or whatever, it's a Harris from like 20 or 30 years ago or something. Not legal for LPFM.
Why don't you make the distinction for the folks certified as opposed to type?
The LPFM transmitters are specifically type certified for LPFM. That is a step above the type acceptance for Part 73. This is a specific LPFM, requirement, and unfortunately, and that really there's a reason for that, and that is because of because of folks like Stephen Dunifer and them who were threatening back in the 1990s to put 10,000 transmitters on the air, as a result of the Telecom Act. And they just did not want people, they wanted these LPFM stations to not have dirty transmitters. So, of course, the NAB begged for this to be in here. And that's where we're at with that. Blanketing interference. Now, this applies to full power too, but not at these same numbers. Much bigger numbers, actually. Interference to other stations by your LPFM station that impacts listeners in an area immediately surrounding your LPFM station. In the first year of operation of a new or modified LPFM facility, LPFM stations must address any interference complaints that come from within 410 feet of the station transmitter antenna. So if somebody is saying, I've got this radio, it's normally a functioning radio, but I hear your station across the entire dial, that's blanketing interference. And you have a financial responsibility in your first year to address any of those issues. So whether it's most of the time the blanketing can be addressed by just buying somebody a new radio. That will usually do the trick. Adding filters or buying a new radio, that is usually the way that works. Now, of course, if the user has a malfunctioning radio or an improperly installed antenna, then you're off the hook. But the best way to make nice with your neighbors, just buy them a new radio.
Michi.
Yeah.
Well, I had something similar happen next door to our studio. Except for they were hearing the station through their computer speakers, and so basically, I bought them a new pair of computer speakers, and that resolved the issue. They didn't hear KLK on there. That is pretty much considered a blanketing interference issue. So yeah, you did the right thing.
Yeah, actually, the blanketing interference only specifically refers to reception of RF signals. However, it's a very good idea to be a good neighbor and fix other problems like that. I've done a lot of fixing phone interference issues too. We're not required to fix those, but it's really part of being a good neighbor.
Michael, it might be good to suggest, I can just suggest two radios if you do have to replace a radio, GE Super Radio 3 or a Sangean, $45 on eBay.
Super Radio.
I love the Super Radios. Those were nice when they were on. Question from over here.
You have a specific distance for the LPs. What about the full powers?
I don't have the exact.
So about 115 dB.
It's 115 dB, I think it is.
I think dBU. 115
dBU from the transmitter, from the base of the tower. So it's, or actually, from the radiation center of the tower.
Actually, there's a utility on the FCC website.
Yeah.
You can compute it.
Yeah, you can go. Yeah, you can use the FCC curves tool, and you just put in your station's height above average terrain. You put in your station's power in kilowatts, and you request the 5010 tables, and you put in actually 50 at that 5010 and 5050 are the same anyway. So. And then just put it was 115 dB.
I think it's 115.
I think it's 115 dBu. That it's in the full checklist. But like I said, I geared this towards LPFM, so I wanted to make it easy.
But if you're a very powerful station on the top of a hill, that could be a half a mile. So.
Yeah. So basically, the self-checks again is your station's ERP and antenna height above average terrain within the limits of 73811. We talked about the 5.6, the 60 dB at 5.6, or if you're under 30 meters above average terrain, 100 watts. It's also it's whatever's on your construction permit or license. That's pretty much it. Is your transmitter power output operating right now between 90 and 105% of what you're authorized on your license? Your license will also have your transmitter power output on it. Is your station running within the frequency tolerances that we talked about, which is the drifting? Is your station operating within the modulation limits? That's the 85 to 100% that we talked about. Is your station is your transmitter clean? Is it staying within those stair steps that we showed you here earlier? Again, that's something that you probably don't have to worry about too much with the modern transmitters. The big one is do you have a transmitter that is certified and has the FCC ID number on the back of it attached, with the FCC, and you can look up those FCC ID numbers online, and has the licensee resolved any complaints of blanketing interference within the first year. If after 1 year somebody complains that their radio is getting, is getting your station all over the dial, and you've been on that site with that power, with that antenna, with that everything for at least a year, you're off the hook. If you want to be a good neighbor, get them a super radio. Fun. Oh.
Michi or Michael, is your experience with full power equipment that gets old? Obviously, we don't have that much with low power equipment. Do these performance characteristics change as equipment ages? Do they go out of spec easier?
Particularly on the tube transmitters, yes.
Not as much solid state.
If you have a fading tube, a common thing is you'll start having some harmonic problems. With the solid state transmitters, not so much so. They usually work or they don't, in most cases.
Yeah.
Okay, now the fun part is the emergency alert system. Now, after we're done with this, we're going to talk a little bit more about EAS, and specifically in regards to the nationwide test that just took place, and pretty much the material in that would apply to everybody in here. But this, for LPFM stations, all LPFM stations must be equipped with an EAS that is capable of monitoring at least 2 assigned EAS stations, and this equipment must be operational during all hours of broadcast operation. Your 2 stations would be in your state EAS plan. LPFM stations are only required to have a decoder. So LPFM stations are not required to encode the tones, but you do have to carry the national and required monthly test messages that come through. A paper copy of the EAS handbook that the FCC publishes, and they just updated it, must be at every EAS control point. Every place where you have an EAS receiver where somebody's monitoring EAS, there's got to be a handbook there. That is an inspection requirement. And the stations must keep an EAS log that contains information on every message received and the outcome of that message, the outcome of broadcasting that message. So did your station receive the message? Which sources did they receive it from? What time did they receive it? And were the messages rebroadcast? The EAS units keep that information there. Those logs are normally generated by the EAS equipment itself. And like with all other logs, they have to be maintained for at least 2 years.
Do we have to print them?
FCC inspectors have told me, this is not explicitly in the rules, that they want you to print them out and check it on a weekly basis. And even though LPFMs aren't required to have a chief operator who would normally be doing this, the LPFMs are still required to review it, and they want you, the inspectors I've talked to want you to print it out on a weekly basis and actually initial it or sign it, and also indicate on your EAS log any deficiencies.
And that's good, because that comes to our other piece, and that is well, not getting there yet, but defective EAS units can be pulled out for up to 60 days. Keep a log of when the unit was removed and when it was restored and when EAS was restored. And this is where the printing comes in. What if your EAS goes bad and you've still got log entries in your unit? So it's always a good idea to maybe print them out, once every so often.
So we have an engineering PhD that wrote a software workaround for the EAS system, and I'm wondering, and he's interested in trying to get this approved by FCC. Should we give up on that and just buy a hardware unit that's already approved, or is that something you see as possibly coming down the road?
Well, does it meet all the requirements?
He says that it does. But I'm not an engineer, so I don't know.
As far as I know, EAS boxes are not specifically reviewed or approved by the FCC.
I believe they are.
I think they are.
They are.
They're inspected by them? Or?
They are. From my understanding, there is a lab test requirement on those. So I would say your answer right now is no. This is a touchy issue, because I know there is some There is some talk out there about, hopefully someday, and this is something I would love to see too, I would love to see open source EAS. I would love to see the open source, some kind of open source, but the problem with open source with EAS is once you do that, the government loses complete control over what, because the problem is right now the government keeps changing the formats. Yeah. And they keep adding all these new codes in there, and they've got the all zeros and then whatever, and all these regional codes and various things. And I think the government wants to keep a little bit of a clamp on that, so they will have a requirement. They want to have some kind of control over that because they want to make sure that all the EAS units out there are dancing to the same dance. So that's pretty much what we've got there. EAS testing, required monthly tests take place between 8:30 a.m. and local sunset on odd number months and between sunset and 8:30 a.m. on even numbered months. LPFM stations are required to carry the RMT, the messages, the required monthly test messages, as well as any nationwide tests and real emergencies that are, like of the nationwide scope. LPFM stations are not required to generate the tones. However, I think a lot of the units still do it. I'm not sure. I'm not a huge expert on EAS. I will admit that. LPFM stations are not required to participate in the required weekly tests. However, your logging, your system will log the weekly tests coming in. So just keep the, and that's what we talk about here. All test messages, including the weekly tests, which come in that you don't have to rebroadcast, should be included in the EAS log that's retained for 2 years.
Can you clarify the not required to participate in the weekly?
Well, that means generating weekly tests. The full power stations have to send a weekly test going out, and low power FMs never conduct any tests going out. They just have to rebroadcast those categories of income.
So we don't have to have any signals, any tones going out on a weekly basis?
No.
Monthly?
No.
Now that's really the only real difference between LPFM and full power.
Yeah.
The full powers have to conduct it outgoing.
Yeah. LPFM does not have an encoder requirement, only a decoder requirement. So the self-check items that are going to be on the checklist. Does your station have an EAS handbook at each EAS control point? Make sure it's a 2016 edition. Does the station only use certified EAS equipment? For manually operated EAS equipment, is the decoder installed in a way that station staff will be alerted simultaneously? So is there a big, so if you're monitoring your EAS automatically, it's not in the audio chain or whatever, are you monitoring, do you have bells and whistles and there's always somebody there sitting there 24 hours a day to look at it? No. So that's pretty much where that's at. For unattended stations, which are going to be pretty much a majority of the LPFMs would fall in this situation, is the EAS configured in a way to interrupt the programming during an emergency or RMT? So make sure your EAS is properly configured in your audio chain. Is the EAS monitoring is the EAS monitoring the designated stations in your EAS plan? Are you monitoring the stations that the State Office of Emergency Services is expecting you to monitor for your region? Usually that goes on a county-by-county basis. Did the station receive an EAS activation in the last week from at least 2 of its designated monitoring sources? So in other words, did your station receive the last required weekly test? Does the station transmit the EAS test script within 60 minutes of receiving a required monthly test? Does the station maintain an EAS log showing each activation? Does the log contain entries of why the EAS weekly and monthly tests were not received? Does the log contain entries documenting the day and time that EAS equipment was removed and was restored into service?
And if you don't get one of these tests, call them.
Yeah.
Can we opt out of AMRA alerts or any of the other things that come across?
Most of the state plans provide some guidance as to what things what additional things they're expecting you to forward beyond what the FCC does. So if your state or regional plan doesn't compel you to carry Amber Alerts, you can opt out. So,
And I think those are carried under different codes.
yeah.
So I think that you could you wouldn't get in trouble for the FCC. The FCC cares about is the RMTs
Right.
and the national activation. So if the president wants to get on your station, that's what the FCC cares about.
So
But-
I'm dealing with the state for everything below that, weather, amber, all that.
Yeah, I think you can voluntarily opt out of those. I think any station can if they wanted to, but I think it's a good idea to keep it going. I mean, that's how they get the word out. That they want voluntary cooperation from the stations.
Can the state mandate that? That?
State has no jurisdiction over that. I wouldn't think that would be more of a legal question. Probably an attorney in a different discipline would probably have to address, because
Also, I think that the state broadcast associations would probably where you would go for the information about that.
Yeah, and
There's both what's required by law and what's kind of customary for the industry.
exactly, and that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the whole thing about being a good neighbor. And so let's see here. So your antenna structures for all LPFM stations, and really for at least these first two are for also full power too. Does the overall height of the structure match that is specified on your station authorization? And if applicable, is your antenna structure registered? Structure registration is normally required on anything with more than 200 feet high, 60 meters, 200 feet, as well as any if your overall tower height is within the glide path of a nearby airport. The FCC does have a tool that you can go to that we use that will do that check. Also, mylpfm.com does a somewhat non-authoritative check of the glide paths for you too. So, but even on that site, I always tell people double check with the FCC site, because that's going to be more authoritative on that. Do your geographic coordinates of the station transmitter location match what's on the station authorization? We see a lot of these problems.
Yeah, and actually I run into this a lot with coordinates being wrong, and if you discover it, just get it corrected. If it's within 3 seconds of latitude plus 3 seconds of longitude, you can correct it just by filing a 319, or in the case of full power 302. If it's more than that, you'll have to file the application.
Yeah, and
318 and the 319.
I think we'll probably see a lot more of that on the full power, especially the older full powers, where they were back in the days from when they were when they didn't have all this modern stuff to. They were using the old topo maps and surveyors to determine the, going through the history project and stuff. I've seen a lot of errors on those.
The best way I found is still with a GPS, with the WAAS correction. Google Earth is usually close, but I would use a GPS as the main reference for coordinates, not for elevation, however.
Right.
But for coordinates.
Yeah.
Short of hiring a surveyor, that's going to be close enough.
And as far as elevation goes, the FCC has pretty much accepted like the the Google stuff, because it's based off of SRTM data. And
it's usually within.
It's usually very close, and we've never had too much problem with that. Also, too, for LPFMs, is a non-directional antenna
We have a question.
in use at the station? Oh, okay, let's.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah, can you say something about the older Redlick EAS boxes with the zeros problem? And
The Gorman Redlick?
FCC just made a determination.
I believe the FCC ruled against Gorman Redlick, and it's unsure what their future is, or whether they...
Yeah, I think the thing is you're going to have to replace it with a newer one.
Yeah, I think that's the way it looks right now.
Zeros.
Unless Gorman comes up with a solution very quickly. Yeah.
Anyway, non-directional antenna is a non-directional antenna in use at your LPFM station. LPFM is a non-directional service. There's only 2 exceptions for directional antennas. If you're using a directional antenna to address a second adjacent channel waiver, and we do have, I have put in a couple LPFMs using that directional antenna waiver. Or you are a public service agency, if you are running like a traveler's information service. That's a very old rule from the original days of LPFM when the New York State Thruway Authority wanted that one in there because they were wanting to put a whole bunch of little LPFM stations along the New York Thruway from Syracuse all the way to New York. So,
or a Canadian border too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Got to go that way too. Antenna structures. Now this only really applies to stations that are on registered towers, so I'm not going to delve too much into it, but towers that are more than 200 feet tall or within the glide slope of the airport must be registered. We talked about that. There are exceptions for antennas that are mounted where the overall height is less than 20 feet above the highest portion of the building. The old 20-foot rule. And some of you can get away with that. Others of you with second adjacent issues, probably not. But there is that. I've done quite a few 20-foot rules. If you have a registered tower, the tower registration numbers must be visible, clearly visible by anyone approaching a gate or a building of the tower. There's an example of a tower registration sign. That one is from the Sutro Tower in San Francisco, which we believe will be which was a possible location of San Francisco Public Press, one of the 2 for 102.5 that just recently resolved up in the Bay Area. Really, our last MX group.
Yeah.
No.
They're competitors.
Oh.
No, Public Press was not on that.
Yeah, it was. I thought one of them was actually going there. It was either that or the community radio, or one of the 2. I don't know. Okay. All right. There are additional checklist items for towers with painting and lighting requirements. So, and like if you're in one of those situations, get with one of us and we'll work with you. Other resources, of course, cheap shameless plug for recnet.com. NFCB is a great resource. We're in the process right now of making their LPFM resources better. I am working very closely with Sally Kane and Ernesto and such, and we are going to we're in the process of trying to make NFCB a great LPFM partner. We want to try to make an NFCB membership worth it for an LPFM, and right now, if you have an LPFM and you are using, especially if you're using underwriting acknowledgement announcements as one of your main models, you really should seriously consider spending the $500 a year and joining NFCB. It's really worth it because there's a lot of great information on there. It's a lot of great information that's going to keep you out of trouble. And it's think of it as an insurance policy. And as mentioned earlier, and I support this idea, your state broadcasters associations. They do have a voluntary alternatives broadcast inspection program, where the State Broadcasters Association will come out and do an FCC style inspection of your station. And in some states, they actually report that the fact that they went out there and inspected the station to the FCC, so that way the FCC knows that that another set of eyes have looked at it, and that will avoid you possibly getting visits from the FCC. Now, of course, it's not going to stop all visits. Complaints and other things could possibly bring in some more. Now, I do have a 2-page checklist it's a PDF form that's online. You can print that out and use that maybe once every couple weeks or so, or however long you want to do it at your station. Keep that in your records if you want. It's not required. You keep it in your records. But the full, and we also have this similar checklist training, which actually has a few more graphics and a few more fun things on it at recnet.com/checklist. This would be something good for you to train your staff. That's why it's there. It's there to, we're doing a train the trainers here. So if you want to do that, feel free to do that, and feel free to use that. And with that, we're done with the checklist. And I guess we can now get into the ETRS EAS test reporting system form.
This is just going to take a couple minutes. We only have a couple minutes left.
While we're waiting,
EAS test reporting system. Yes.
Oh no! I was going to say I didn't know if you wanted to delay. I was going to ask some questions.
Oh, okay. Any questions?
Let's see if we can get this right the first time here.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Dead air, is that a condition that needs to be remedied in 3 hours or you're out of compliance?
Ooh.
As long as you have IDs.
Yeah, if you're out of compliance once your station is not IDing, yeah, I would definitely. If you're running dead air for 3 hours and you can't recover from it, yeah, I would shut down.
Okay, well, hopefully all of you at least have heard of ETRS, EAS Test Reporting System. You probably know that late last month there was a national test. There may or may not be another one. But meanwhile, we are all supposed to file Form 1, 2, and 3. So Form 1 was before the test was conducted. Form 2 was required on the day of the test. And the test was late morning, and by the end of that day, everyone was supposed to have filed Form 2. If you haven't done Form 2 yet, still go ahead and do that. It's just 2 questions. Did you receive the national test? And did you relay it? In the case of this national test, the EAS systems are normally set up so it starts relaying basically live. It's almost live, delayed by maybe just a couple of seconds. Form 3, however, we have until November 14th, I believe it is, to file Form 3, and there's a lot more questions on that. Was the national test received? The source from which you received that? The time and date? Which time zone they are in? Were there any complications in receiving it? And provide an explanation. There will be space to do that. And did the station retransmit the national test? The date and time, any complications on that, and any additional explanations. The FCC is taking this very seriously. In fact, the day before the test, the national test, I got a call from a couple of stations who have been on the air for a year or more and never bought an EAS unit. Wow. And they said, can I get one overnighted and can you program it in time? So we still don't know. If anybody in this room has more up-to-date information from this, please let me know. But we still don't know. The FCC, from what I've seen, has not spilled the beans as to what kind of enforcement action they may or may not take on this. But with everybody having to do these forms, it's pretty much all of us can't hide anymore. If we're not in full compliance, we need to be in full compliance.
So I attended the Texas Association of Broadcasters training on this, and they had people from the Media Bureau and from FEMA presenting. They said the only one that would be enforced was Form 1 at this point in time. So if you did not file your Form 1, that was a big problem.
Yeah.
And they wanted it by that original date, but still, you should file it if you have not already.
A big thing I'm finding with stations that are often not in compliance is not monitoring the stations that they were required to. And in every case, if you're just unable to receive those 2 stations for some reason, you just can't get it, or it's at nighttime, it's an AM station with a lousy nighttime pattern, talk to your state or regional EAS coordinator, and they will reassign you another assignment. And it's usually somebody, one step down on the daisy chain. Don't just ignore it. That's once again, that's something we can't hide very easily anymore.
I would say save any records of anything.
Yes.
In regards
Content. And the old idea, I heard at least in the early days of LPFM, there really was a feeling that the state broadcasters associations and everybody else in commercial radio were very anti-LPFM, and we're just not going to talk to them. If that was the case then, it doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
It is not the case now, and I can tell you, firsthand that we had several state broadcasters associations file supporting comments for RM 11749, the LP250.
Yeah,
So-
and, which is quite a turnaround, because in the first round of LPFM, every single state broadcasters
It was
association
fear.
was opposed to LPFM. Every one of them.
It was fear. It's like same-sex marriage. It's fear. People were afraid that the sky was going to fall with LPFM, and now that these state broadcasters associations have had some experience with it, and guess what? They have stations joining their membership ranks.
That's true.
So,
They've seen that the world did not end.
and you got LPFM stations. They're not just a bunch of kids out there playing radio. They're serious broadcasters. They're using the voluntary inspection program. They want to be good radio neighbors, and so the State Broadcasters Association, some of them have pretty much come around. I'd say probably everyone except New Jersey.
Yeah, question?
So the stations that aren't on yet do have to do that?
No, if you're not on the air.
Got it.
In fact, I know of several LPFMs that were thinking of signing on and delayed the sign on until after this test.
Wow, that's funny. Just share my experience with it. So I filled out Form 2.
Yes.
And I didn't realize it at the time, but I misinterpreted the term, the relay there, which I thought meant like pass it on to another station via the EAS. And I said, no, we're the end of the chain there. We monitor other
if
stations.
national tests, you're required to rebroadcast that test.
Well,
and so
that's the key word is. So when I went to go to do Form 3, I called the FCC and asked, and so you used the word that they didn't broadcast. That's not what it said. So in other words, did it go over the air? Yes.
Yeah.
But I got concerned about in Form 2 it says relay, in Form 3 it says retransmit. And I thought that meant passing it down the chain to another station. So anyhow, when I talked to them about Form 3, they said, don't worry about Form 2. Once you do Form 3, that supersedes
even if you have an error in Form 2, don't bother trying to correct it.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Betty whether we can still correct Form 2s if there were errors. Do you know?
I think you can.
Okay.
This guy implied that Form 3 was the mechanism to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can probably just update your Form 3, because Form 3 asks, the same. 2 of the questions in Form 2 are duplicated in 3.
And a lot of people, at least 80% of the country got this properly, but there's a good 10 or 20 who didn't. And if you had an utter failure, just tell them the truth. But at the same time, in your explanations, have a brief description of the procedures you're taking to fix it. And as long as you're making an effort and demonstrating that you're making an effort to fix it, you're not going to get fined. Just get that done. Admit that it didn't work, and tell them how you're fixing it. Yes, exactly. It's a test.
Our signals went off about 2 hours. There was a delay of about 2 hours. And we were kind of freaking out because everybody else got them and didn't have. Has anyone else had that issue?
It relayed it, but 2 hours late?
Yes.
Ours did exactly 1 hour later.
Okay.
Not from our primary over the air. It must have gotten it from the internet thing.
Okay, let me ask you, do you have your EAS box set up for automatic relay and interrupt the line? Because there, as I recall, there were some settings you could have so that you have it in manual, where you can manually do it, and after a certain amount of time elapses and you hadn't manually forwarded a message, it says, well, I guess they're not going to do it. I guess I'll have to do it for them. Most stations, even the big commercial stations, now just go automatic relay for everything, so they don't have to worry about whether they did it or not. And in the case of national tests, national tests and alert, you're supposed to be doing it live. And I thought that the units were hard-coded to do that.
Well, I had twice before the test, just because we wanted to make sure we were prepared, had the manufacturer log in and make sure everything was set up right. And 2 different technicians from the manufacturer logged in and said everything was
Really?
So
Well,
I just didn't know if that was something the FCC was.
this is the first time I've heard that happening, but
Well, I'll make some phone calls.
Same with-
yeah, make some
same with
phone
us.
calls.
I
Yeah.
listened to the primary, and it went off at 2:20 Eastern time, like it should.
Mhm.
And then at 3:20, our station put out the FSK
Yeah.
and the relay message.
Yeah, that was
For
what
a
happened
national
with our-
test, it
we
shouldn't be doing that,
received it
yeah.
on time. Because I logged in when it go off, and we had received it, but there was a thing, a red line on our box saying it was delayed. I actually think it was more like 1 hour. So anyway,
So
okay.
I'm
Didn't know
sure
if
there are
anyone else-
people in this room who had a problem, right? So just fix it, document what you're doing to fix it, and you'll be okay. And at some point, I think they're going to do another test.
Yeah, they probably will. I just think that this test was really a reaction to the previous EAS test they did a few years ago that was a complete disaster.
Yeah, this one is 80% or more.
This one was actually went pretty smoothly. We
Yeah,
had
but there were plenty that Oregon Public Broadcasting, who's the main input for the entire state, failed. So there's some big multi-million-dollar operations there that had problems.
I did post some numbers. I forgot what the numbers were as far as the success rate goes, based on my clients, other feedback that I heard from LPFMers and others, as well as monitoring the NFCB list.
Yeah, because NFCB was
There
not
was,
in
I
that
think
too.
it was about, I probably have to agree with your 80 or 85% success rate overall.
That's just my estimates based on reading
Yeah.
hundreds of comments. That's not scientific number.
How many got it first via cap, relayed their cap?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, we had a few that got it.
You would think that that would be the fastest.
Yeah.
Because that comes through via the internet. But that wasn't always the case, and I can't quite explain that.
Oh, really?
If everything was working properly, everything, you got it 3 times at least. You got the cap, and then you got the 2 radio stations that you were monitoring. And the unit, of course, is smart enough to only take the first one and ignore the duplicates.
Yeah, but it will still log all the other ones.
Yeah, it'll log them, but
wanna check
it's
your
not going to
logs.
send it again.
Yeah, if there's something else going up, you want to check your logs and make sure that you are getting both LPs, your LP1 and your LP2.
So in reality, if you didn't receive this test 3 times on your log, something was wrong somewhere. It might not be your problem, it might be the station that you were monitoring had a failure. But you should find out. Call them and find out if you don't have 3.
Any other questions all the way around?
I'm not monitoring CAP.
Uh-oh.
Is that a problem?
Yes.
Shh.
Also known as iPods.
Yeah.
I got 2 radios, that's it.
Well, you got to get cap.
Yep. That's why you have to get the new boxes.
Yeah. Either a new box or one of the add-on boxes.
Because they'll specify whether it's cap compliant or not.
What do those cost?
The add-ons?
No, for a new one.
New?
Well, I prefer the Sage. A lot of people like DASDEC. They're both in the low 2000s now. They've actually been dropping in price the last few years. I think you can get the brand new Sage for about $22.50, something like that. That includes the interrupt unit. It does not include any receivers, however.
Man, they got to take a lesson from pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, charge more. I mean, the same units were close to $3,000 just a few years ago, and they've actually been dropping in
If
price.
there's a small marketplace for something and a specific niche demand, you can charge a lot. Look at the assistive technology industry for the blind. I mean, come on, they charge what, $5,000 for screen reader software? That's obscene.
How did any of you get the DASDEC update without having to pay the $250, or did you all have to pay that, or do you all have Sages?
Sage.
The DASDEC, I called them and they said if you had purchased it within a year, that they would give you a free S-rate. But after that, you got.
I thought that was in bad taste for them to charge for that upgrade, though.
And in fact, we did the version 3, and it introduced a delay in being able to put the tones on the ear. It's like a 5-second wait.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of a bug. And I would say that could be attributable to that 1 hour delay.
Oh, okay.
If it's very-
Yeah, actually, having the latest firmware is very important. In the case of the Sage, the last firmware release was July. And if you didn't have the July release, there was a potential that your unit wasn't going to work properly here.
We upgraded a couple years ago to be CAP compliant, upgraded our Sage NDEC to the newest thing that's CAP compliant. Does our old unit have any use whatsoever? Like, I mean, I hate to just throw it in the in the dumpster.
Boat warmer? Boat anchor.
I think if you had the add-on CAP unit, it would...
I can tell you that we have like an old TFT with the receiver options for it. And that unit, which is 10, 15 years old, the receivers are actually better than the ones that are built into the gas deck. And so we're using like the line output of those into the line input.
Oh, yeah.
So we can get more reliable reception on AM.
Wow.
For the receivers, what I find for AM, the best thing is to have a rooftop shielded loop antenna.
Yes.
And for FM, also an antenna, directional antenna. If you don't have clean, clear reception 24/7 from your stations you're monitoring, it may not be able to decode very well, or at all. If there's noise and hiss, even just a light to moderate, the decoder may not work. It's got to be clean reception. Yeah.
Is there any talk, given what appears to be the success of the CAP aspect of the national test, is there talk that you've heard of switching to CAP and iPods as like the primary?
As the only way?
Yeah. No?
That wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
Internet outages.
Oh, I know.
Well, CAP, Common Alerting Protocol, was actually written so that it can be across multiple platforms too, on cell phones and any other way we may communicate. So that's one of the
Actually,
reasons.
what I was surprised about, because I monitored the test, and here in Salisbury, our LP1 and LP2 were about a second or two apart, but who I thought was going to be involved in the test and wasn't, was the National Weather Service.
Yeah, that was surprising.
I was surprised.
Oh, they didn't? I
I had my VHF radio on, listening to NOAA, and there was never a test.
Right.
I'm not sure if they were there.
LP1 and LP2 are like 8 seconds apart. They're both geographically very close.
And especially some of these stations that have NOAA as a secondary assignment in their EAS plan. If a one of those third or fourth stations, if you want to monitor it, mainly for the weather alerts.
Yeah. Well, some state plans are actually compelling their stations to monitor a third and occasionally even a fourth source. The state of Washington, for example, used to have a statewide VHF relay system. I don't know if they're using it anymore, but every station in the state was required to have that third source. So, but the FCC is only going to, as far as we can tell, they're only going to enforce the FCC requirements, which is those first two. Okay.
All right.